I just want to say a few words about John. John is familiar to most of us. He's already been a contributor to previous schools. He is best known today as a peace activist, and there is barely a demonstration on PESCO or on any aspect of militarisation of the EU where you don't see John in attendance. And he's written on peace issues, and he's made a very, very valuable contribution to the campaigns against the militarisation, particularly against the militarisation of the EU. So, without further ado, I would hand you over to John.
Because I know we're in for a treat. I've heard Liz before, I'm sure many of you have, and we're certainly in for a treat. One of the times that I spoke here, I made a little play on words that I think is particularly relevant this afternoon. Because I said, it's more an onordum Quiraoil, Chalk Douglas Ve Glowich, in Onadon Fiersig. And I was playing on Onadon Fiersig being the home of Pearse, but also, of course, in Irish it would mean in place of Pearse. And everything that happened after 1916 was, in some sense, in place of Pearse. Now, there's a poem to be written by someone playing on that, being in the home of the absent Pearse and what people were to do in that situation. And I think that's particularly relevant now because we're talking about the decisive year where either 1916 was corrected or 1916 was endorsed, but certainly something decisive was done about the rising and the revolution. And it strikes me, I'm not a historian, and I'll be able to sit there as an interested listener. It strikes me, obviously, there were so many currents around at the time, so many currents of thought and so many movements from feminism, pacifism, nationalism, republicanism, militancy, all of those issues, socialism, communism, and all of those were looking for their futures, and obviously by definition only one future came about. And I'm interested in, I love the origins of words, and I'm interested in the word decision, because decision is like incision, it's a cut. And I'm interested in how the cut was made, who made the cut, and when was that cut made? Was the cut made by arguments or armaments, or by some blend or mixture of the two? Now, I think that's plenty for a chairperson to say, but I'll trespass on your kindness for a couple of minutes before I introduce Liz by saying where and how I met her and something that I raised with her, because I had the great pleasure of hearing her speak at a hugely symbolic occasion, certainly relevant to this afternoon, and that was the conference on the actual centenary of the anti-conscription pledge and movement in the Mansion House, and Liz gave a wonderful talk there. And if I can just take 1 or 2 minutes to mention my personal interest in it, only as an illustration of the fact that all of us have stories that went through this period, and we're all descended from those stories. Liz will be too young, and I'm glad there are some other people here too young, to understand, to recognise the phrase, if you feel like singing, do sing an Irish song. Now, that was my father, but less well known, though he did pay tribute to it, and I'll mention that before I sit down and let the real action commence. Less well known is that his father, John Jack Maguire, whose namesake I am, was in the Irish Citizen Army, along with his son Frank, my uncle Frank, from 1913, from the lockout on. He went right through with the Citizen Army, obviously, because he ended up in Mountjoy and then in Newbridge against the treaty in 22-23, and was on the hunger strike there. My father has actually written a wonderful ballad called The Irish Citizen Army, and at the end of the proceedings, if people want to prove we're not in this world for pleasure alone, I might give you a blast of it, but that's well down the line. But I mention that, as I say, only to mention why I have not only a general theoretical but also a personal interest, and we all have, because these are the currents of ideas, these are the ideas, the movements, not just ideas, among which a cut was made. How was the cut made? Who made the cut? And for me, with my obsession, as Kevin says, with current neutrality, PESCO, etc., how did all of that frame the world in which we now live? We couldn't have someone better or more vivid or better equipped to bring us through all that area. I know I've heard her, I'm sure others of you have, as I say. The programme shows that Liz, who's a researcher, a lecturer, historian, curatorial assistant, has written a large number of books. Somewhat suspiciously, the last one mentioned is that she was the author of The Burning of the Custom House. Now, I think the statute of limitations has run out. So I think she's safe, and I'm sure you're in safe hands in listening to her.
That's some introduction. Thank you so much. And everyone, as we know, Donal Fallon was meant to be here today. Unfortunately, Donal is out of action, so I am going to try and touch on some aspects that Donal would have spoken about. So this talk is pretty much talking about 1918. So I suppose where we begin with 1918 and what really kicks off everything is the threat of conscription. Now, as Ramon alludes to earlier with his talk, in the spring of 1918, it was not clear-cut that Germany was going to lose the war, because they did launch their spring offensive. Now, as this image shows, we have conscription passed in England, but that was not extended to Ireland in 1916. However, a lot had changed in those 2 years, and in the spring of 1918, there was the fear that the Allies could lose. They need more people, and conscription then is passed to Ireland. And you have here in immediate, the press are reporting on this. You have daily reports of what's happening all across Europe, the successes that the German army are having against the Allies. So the fear is very, very real. And the response is then that conscription will be passed. Just to point out this little bit to you, the momentous proposals. According to the parliamentary correspondence of the Times, the principal proposals in the Manpower Act are the raising of the military age to 50 years, the enactment of the principle that Irishmen are liable to compulsory military service for the defence of the Empire on the same terms as Englishmen, Scotsmen and Welshmen. So this is a reality now. The response from Ireland, from all sections of society in Ireland, was immediate, and some that are the driving force behind this, one that is the driving force behind this is of course the bishops. Now, me probably being a little bit cynical, conscription didn't exclude, or the Irish Conscription Act, it didn't exclude priests, so maybe there was a little bit of self-preservation in that for the clergy, I don't know. But the priests, the bishops, they do come out and they start to organise. But very quickly on foot of this, we have all the political parties organising their response, that they are all going to resist conscription. And it happens very, very quickly in a couple of days after this announcement is made by the British government. So we have a committee, an anti-conscription committee set up. You have a meeting out in Maynooth with the bishops. You have then on the 18th of April the meeting in the Mansion House called by the Lord Mayor. And here we have the members of the anti-conscription committee. And it is bringing together all sections of political life at that time. So you have Labour, you have Sinn Féin, you have the Irish Parliamentary Party, and you have independents. So there we have Arthur Griffith for Sinn Féin, Eamon de Valera Sinn Féin, John Dillon IPP, Joseph Devlin IPP, William O'Brien Independents, Thomas Johnson Labour, Michael Egan Labour, Tim Healy Independent, and William O'Brien Labour. So it is people who would not be together coming together because this common cause is uniting them, and it is a very valid cause. And one of the things that they come up with is that there will be a national pledge to resist. And I'm sure you've seen, maybe some of you have been at talks throughout the year about the anti-conscription campaign. You've seen the footage from Pathé News where people in their hundreds are outside churches and so on taking this pledge. And the pledge would read, basically denying the right of the British government to enforce compulsory service in this country. We pledge ourselves solemnly, one to another, to resist conscription by the most effective means at our disposal. Now, this wording is thanks mainly in part to Eamon de Valera. You did have a few priests who were really keen to encourage resistance by whatever means necessary, and if that included force, then so be it. You have the bishops not wanting to go that far, but Eamon de Valera, he pushes on this, and this is the resultant national pledge that we have. And everyone, you can see it, as I said, hundreds of thousands of people take this pledge, men, women, all across the country. It is very, very effective. But that is not the only method that they have to resist, because Labour, they called a general strike, which is hugely, hugely effective. I think that was on the 23rd. The pledge is taken on the 20th, 21st of April. And I think it was on the 23rd of April that the national strike happens. And the country comes to a standstill. And you have people making sure that people in workplaces, in hotels, that everyone is actually going out on strike across the country. And it is a hugely, hugely important moment for Labour in this, because it shows the strength that Labour does have. And here we have just some examples of how the pledge was taken. Now, we're lucky in that we have some remaining pledges, or some remaining ledgers, from the day that they took the pledge, but literally the signatures were taken down in ledgers. In Maynooth, the seminary, you have the signatures still in those books. They still exist. They're in the archives out in Maynooth. There's one in Monaghan for members of the community there to sign. So some of them do still exist. And what's also great about the ledgers that do exist is like they're a mini census, because there's so much information in them, because as we know, there wasn't a census taken in 1921, it's not until 1926, and we're still waiting to get that information released. So at least if you can see some of these ledgers, you can get a little picture of who was around and where they were in 1918. But there's massive, massive coverage in the newspapers about this event, about this campaign. This is the country coming together to say no to the British government. And you can see that there is a why there is such resistance to this, because in the immediate aftermath of 1916, you do have really repressive measures coming down on those who had struck a blow for Irish freedom and those who had nothing to do with the Easter Rising, the mass arrests being one of them, and a lot of people become politicised after 1916. One very important point to note is that after 1916, when they're released in December and in July 1917, they could have easily gone back to the gun. They had way more many members in the volunteers and so on, but they didn't. Those who had been out in 1916, they decided they will try the political route. Unfortunately, the response to this from the British government is coercive measures. Meetings are declared illegal and so on. And this eventually does build up then to what we then have in 1919. But you can see this is another mass movement of people coming together in a democratic way to resist the government. They don't like it. Here's another example of the mass meetings that took place all across the country, and again the newspaper reports are full of reports about these events, and you can see just a sea of heads there. And here we have Father Michael O'Flanagan, who quite soon was the eventual leader of Sinn Féin during the War of Independence, if I recall, and he's one of the radical priests that the clergy think is getting too big for his boots. He is too radical, and he should be reining it in a bit, but he doesn't, and he does pay the price for that. But these meetings, you have on the platform Eamon de Valera speaking with a member of the Irish Parliamentary Party, so they're working together for the common cause. Now, it is not only the response from the citizens of Ireland from the political parties, from the church. The Irish Volunteers, they had their own method to deal with conscription, and this was to go on the attack. Now, general headquarters hadn't been set up yet. You have Cathal Brugha here, and at the time he's chairman of the Volunteer Resident Executive, so this is like the forerunner to what becomes general headquarters, the general headquarters staff. So he's pretty much organising things, and then this man, Dick McKee, he had been promoted to the commandant of the Dublin Brigade of the Volunteers. He'd been out in 1916, he was 2nd Battalion, he's in Jacobs, and is one of those that is imprisoned after the Rising. And these two men had very clear ideas on what they would do if the British government tried to actually impose conscription if it became a reality. Cathal Brugha famously organised a task force of volunteers to go over to England and to basically assassinate members of the British Parliament if they were going to enact conscription. And remember, at this time there is a build-up, there is a reorganisation of the volunteers constantly going. Weapons obviously are a huge issue. They don't have enough weapons, and with the conscription crisis even more men join the volunteers. There isn't enough guns for all of these people that are in the volunteers. But he puts forward a proposal that they will attack the Custom House in 1918. And what he was actually seeing, or what he proposed, was that it would be like another 1916. The streets surrounding the Custom House would be basically isolated, as in their mini units. So you'd have a man that lived in a street in charge of that street. So if one street fell, then the fight could continue. And what's really interesting about this is that that's the first time the Custom House, the attack is actually put on the cards. They don't have properly men trained, they don't have enough weapons, but what that shows is that the Custom House was always in the eyes of the volunteers, not a matter of if it was going to be attacked, just when. Now, these proposals do not come into, they're not enacted. However, Cathal Brugha did have his men over in England ready to strike if conscription became a reality. So, one response from the British government, and this again if you're looking back to 1917 with the arrest of Thomas Ashe and the special treatment that was meted out to him, the coercive response from the British government. How do we try to smash up this movement? How do we try to undermine the rise in power of Sinn Féin? Come up with a plot, and we have the German plot. Complete fabrication, where you have basically this belief that the Republicans are again seeking help from Germany. They're going to bring in arms, we're going to have another rise, and so using our intelligence, and we'll cut this off, we'll stop this before it can even happen. What do we do? Arrest all the leaders of Sinn Féin. Some people, Cathal Brugha, Michael Collins, Harry Boland and so on, they evade arrest. They had been warned that they were coming for them. Eamon de Valera and many others believed, let them come, we've nothing to hide. And so you do have a huge number of Sinn Féin representatives then put in prison, and one of them is Countess Markievicz. There we have Eamon de Valera there. We also have Sean McGarry, I think it is there, W.T. Cosgrave. So they're just a handful of those who are actually arrested in May 1918. But it doesn't work because people are aware that this is a complete fabrication and it will actually backfire on the government. One hugely important event that happens in 1918, which was completely forgotten, is Lánamán, the women's response to the conscription threat. And this is a hugely, hugely significant event. This was basically the women of Ireland standing up and saying to the British government, no. Now, we know that women were granted, or were going to get the vote. Women over the age of 30 at the war's end, when there would be a general election, suffrage would be granted to women over 30 with certain other conditions, and for men the voting age was lowered to 21. But what the women of Ireland decide to do, and this is a trade union movement, it's the Irish Women's Workers' Union, it's Cumann na mBan, it's feminists, it's all of these women coming together saying, what can we do to stand up to the British government? So it is decided that on the 9th of June there will be this nationwide event where women from all over the country will have their chance to take their own pledge. And basically you have events taking place in churches, You have events in Dublin, it was City Hall. How did they get out word that this event was going to happen on the 9th of June? The priests from the pulpit on Mass or at Mass on Sunday announced that on the 9th of June you're going to meet here, and then we're going to have a procession, and then you'll come back, you'll sign the pledge, take the pledge, and then there'll be a march off to a place of pilgrimage. And that was pretty much what happens. And you have posters like this and banners like this, and this is key. Conscription, no woman must take a man's job. This is the way the women can really play a part, and that is realised in their pledge. And just to talk to you about what happened on 9th of June, the 9th of June Sunday in 1918, the women came out in their droves. The weather was atrocious. Now in some parts of the country it was really bad, so the event had to be called off, but it was then just put back to another date. You have in City Hall, basically the ledgers are there and kept open for over a week, so women who could not make it on the Sunday could then make it in whatever day they could to put their name to this pledge. This is one of the very few photographs I've been able to find on Lánamán, and this is a contingent of Cumann. Now, the thing with Cumann is that these women were used to organising big crowds. These are the women that organised the homecomings in December 1916, Countess Markievicz in 1917. They're used to dealing with crowds. And how I came to hear about this event was through the pension files, where the women just talked about being involved in anti-conscription activity. However, there was a core group of women that mentioned this event, Lánamán, or I was active at City Hall, 9th of June 1918. And the two groups of women that state that are either the Citizen Army women or the women from the Anina branch of Cumann. And both of these groups have a long history. They've been out on the strikes, members of the Irish Women's Workers' Union, with Anina Naharan. They probably involved with each other since 1900 when Anina was first set up. These are the two militant groups that emerge after 1916, because in these groups you have women who are trained in the use of guns, in weapons, and with the Citizen Army women, they're the second line. If the front line goes, they're the ones that will carry on the fight. And it's the women of the Anina branch that are the stewards for the day. So there's only about 24, 28 of them, but they're the ones that are organising what way this will go and organising the crowds. And again, great newspaper reports. One example, you have all the women, say, from Inchicore, and they're going to come into City Hall. So they start off at Inchicore, they meet at the Obelisk Church, and they either take the pledge outside the church or they had signed their names beforehand. They march off down Emmett Road and they come to James Street, where the next group of women are waiting with their signatures ready to go, and then they march off, comes to junction at Meath Street and Thomas Street, where they meet the women from the Liberties, and they have their signatures ready. They all march off, and that continues right down until they get to City Hall. Now obviously you can't have 40,000 women marching together, so what they had to do was they all had time slots. So the Irish Women's Workers' Union say, because they were the biggest group, it was over 2,000 women from the Irish Women's Workers' Union, so they're the first ones to go in and sign the pledge and so on. They would do that in about half an hour, and then the next lot was coming on, then the next lot the Drapers Association, and so on, until finally, I think it was about maybe 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock that afternoon, then the women, the general public, they could go. We had a standoff at Christchurch, because you had the Unionist women, the Protestant women. They wanted to be a part of this, but they saw that as a Republican event, but they yet wanted to have their voice in this movement. So it was agreed that they would take the pledge at Christchurch, except the Dean there did not want to have anything to do with this movement. And the women were left out in the pouring rain, they're banging on the door. Finally, when he opens the door to them, he takes the pledge off them or the signature and rips it up in front of them. But what was really important about that is that it is women from all religious persuasions, all political persuasions, just like the National Pledge, that they're coming together. to make a stand and to say no. And what the women, what they were pledging is, and it's really, really important, because the enforcement of conscription on any people without their consent is tyranny, we are resolved to resist the conscription of Irishmen. We will not fill the places of men deprived of their work through refusing enforced military service. We will also do all in our power to help the families of men who suffer through refusing enforced military service. And what the women are saying to the British government is, you may get your army through conscription, but your country is not going to function because we are not going to fill the places of the men in the workforce. And that is a hugely, hugely important thing to do. What is interesting in the aftermath, there's just some of the newspaper reports. You can see 40,000 women signed it in Dublin alone. 2/3 of the women of Ireland signed the anti-conscription pledge. And what is really significant about that is that you had women who were not going to be represented under the People's Representation Act. These women were not getting the vote, but yet they were able to make their voice heard through this day, and it was heard. One really interesting thing that comes in the aftermath of Law na Món. Now, you had proclamations from the authorities in March, banning meetings, so again it's the repressive measures coming in from the government, but you always had an end date. So March, that was going to end in May, but of course then you have the strike and you have this huge resistance with the anti-conscription campaign. A couple of days after Law na Món, I think it was the 11th of June, this proclamation is issued, and you can see it there: prohibit the holding of any such meeting or of any such procession on or after the 14th day of June 1918 until further notice. There's no end date. So now, if you want to have a meeting, you have to ask permission from the authorities for that. So, and this is as a direct result of both the anti-conscription meetings and Law na Món, because it is announced 2 or 3 days after that event takes place. Here we have some of the people, again, that are still languishing in prison as part of the German plot. Amy de Valera, Countess Markievicz, Kathleen Clark, W.T. Cosgrave, and you had people protesting for the release of these men and women, and they hadn't committed a crime yet. They're languishing in prisons in England, and there are efforts to make this known and to campaign for their release. But you have then the result, as a result of that conscription or that proclamation being issued by the authorities, how this directly impacts on the women, and it has a hugely important effect on the lives of women and the women putting themselves in danger. This girl, Joyce McGowan, she was a member of the Union of Heron branch. She was out in 1916, fought in Marylebone Lane. She's one of the 77 women that's arrested. Another thing that the Nina women mentioned in their pension files was a meeting at Foster Place. I was at a protest meeting at Foster Place 1918. So start looking through the newspapers and little snippets of the story begins to emerge. Foster Place, just where the Bank of Ireland is, that was a regular place for meetings to be held. And in September you have the women of Cumann na Món and other organisations who put on a protest meeting, and they're protesting for the release of Countess Markievicz and for Kathleen Clark, and I think it was Maud Gonne, was also in Holloway prison at this time. The women were suffering, their health was suffering when they were in prison, so their comrades, their friends, they're protesting for their release. It had often been said, certainly if you look at the pension files, that the work that the women did, it was political work, it wasn't military work, so it wasn't dangerous. The women were battened at this meeting. Josie McGowan is one of the women that was attacked by the police at this meeting. 10 days after that meeting, Josie McGowan is dead. She was only 20 years of age. Her anniversary is actually, we're coming up to our anniversary this month. Looking, and this is through the work of Micheál Devlin, who's found Josie's story years ago, and took years until he found what actually happened to her. The official verdict for the death certificate, Josie's death, was that Josie died of pneumonia. Now, it's at the time of the flu and so on, so that could easily be a thing that did happen. However, the family story was that Josie was beaten. She was attacked. But what the family initially thought was that she'd been going out with a British soldier, and she could have been attacked by her friends, to stop her going out with a British soldier. As it turns out, Josie is at the meeting in Foster Place, and Josie is beaten at Foster Place. Now, at this time, Cumbernauld had first aid stations all around Dublin City, but also in the mountains, and he'd one at Ticknock. Where Josie died, as stated on her death certificate, if I recall, is that it was in the Dublin Mountains, or the family said it was in the Dublin Mountains. Josie's taken to Ticknock. So you have the family story and the newspapers and the pension files bringing the story of what actually happened to Josie, revealing that 100 years later. Now, people could say, oh, you're putting two and two together, you're hoping you're coming up before. What makes me believe this is the story is because when it came to the release of the medals, Josie got a 1916 medal posthumously, but she also got a War of Independence medal posthumously with the Active Service Bar across. The War of Independence begins in 1919. Josie died in September 1918, and as you know, that the Active Service Bar, the medals with that on it, are rare. So why was that given to her? It had to have something to do with the sacrifice that Josie McGowan made on that day in Foster Place. Hers is just one of many of stories like that. Soon after, of course, the war was still going on. And then in November, the 11th of November, we have the armistice. And again, newspaper reports, the war is over, everything, it's all done. And great celebrations, as we all could imagine. And an immediate aftermath of this is that a general election is going to be called, and that will be held in December, on December 14th, 1918. Now, as we know with the conscription crisis, that you have a lot of people who become politicised. The Irish Volunteers, although their membership had swelled in the initial, when the threat really was there, when the threat started to fall away, the volunteer numbers start to fall away, so you're left with a hardcore of men who will fight when the War of Independence does begin. A difference between the volunteers and Cumbernauld is that Cumbernaund's membership also increased as a result of Londonderry, but it doesn't fall away. You've got more branches of Cumbernauld being set up all across the country, and they just continue to grow and grow and grow. So immediately you have Sinn Féin putting forward their TDs, the Irish Parliamentary Party, which had been the party that dominated Irish political life for so long. They, in some areas, they still have that foothold, that grassroots support. They will never be defeated by Sinn Féin, but across the country everything begins to change, and the result is that it's an overwhelming victory for Sinn Féin. Of course, in this election, women over 30 did get the vote, and this was thanks in part to so many people, from the early pioneers Thomas and Anna Haslam, also Isabella Todd, to the more recent, more militant suffragettes, Hannah Sheehy Skeffington and Margaret Cousins. But one of the highlights of 1918 is that women over 30 can actually use their vote and have their voice heard. And the women come out in their droves. And in two women that are put forward by Sinn Féin are Countess Markievicz, so Countess Markievicz needs no introduction, who was in prison, and then Winifred Carney. So they're the two women that are put forward by Sinn Féin. And whereas Countess Markievicz does win her seat, Winifred Carney doesn't. She was put forward in, I think it was Belfast, and it was a really hard constituency to win. She isn't elected. But those who are elected, one of the policies of Sinn Féin obviously is that they will not go to Westminster. They feel that the best way to represent Ireland is to have a parliament in Ireland, representatives actually on the ground in Ireland, and they will have their parliament, the Dáil, in this city, in this country. Unfortunately, as we know, not many of them can attend. And just to show you some of the reports, the newspaper reports, there you have it. Women are voting in strength and with enthusiasm, and the polling just takes place all across the country. And there was a need for those first aid stations as well, because there were clashes between supporters of Sinn Féin and the Irish Parliamentary Party. So one thing was that coming on, we're thinking ahead, and those first aid stations did come in to use, unfortunately. So here we have the first sitting of the Dáil. We know that 73 were elected, but there's not 73 there because over half of them are in prison. Collins isn't there and Harry Bones aren't there because they were in England trying to actually planning the escape of Eamon de Valera from Lincoln. But you can see there that this is now these are the representatives of the Irish people. They have the thing of the proclamation, the vision of the proclamation. When they will meet, if they're all released, then they can build on what this 1916 proclamation did state, and they do that later on. But the Dáil meets on the 24th of January 1919, and the very same day we then have the ambush at Soloheadbeg. Dan Breen, Sean Tracy, where they shoot the policeman when they're escorting the Gelignite. And here you have the newspaper reports. So on one hand it's the political wing, it's Dáil Éireann, and then we have the military wing coming into effect on the same day. What is key about 1918, there are so many things that were going on in 1918 that were going to change the nature of the future of Ireland. One of them is the Irish Parliamentary Party. Possibly a thing that people never thought could happen was decimated. It was gone. The rise of Sinn Féin is huge. Women are politicised, they're becoming involved in political life. And of course then the one big thing is that we have politics, and unfortunately and sadly violence going hand in hand. For me, I would say, and this is just me, that things like Soloheadbeg, events like Soloheadbeg were inevitable when you look at the previous 2.5 years, where the politicians, where members of Sinn Féin and the volunteers tried to go down that political democratic route, and they were coerced. When you've got young men like Dan Breen, Sean Tracy, other really militant men, what they do see and what they believe is that the only thing the British government will respond to is the gun. It is violence, and that unleashes itself on the 24th of January 1919. 1918 is a huge turning point in the history, not just of this country, because as we know, Ireland, small country, but all eyes were on Ireland. And sort of to tie in what Ruan was saying, you have all of these countries of the empire, India, Palestine. Who was watching Ireland? How would Britain treat Ireland? And if Ireland did get independence, what would that mean for those countries? And that feeds into the whole thing of the treaty and so on. Britain was never going to give the Republic because it's not Ireland, it is the empire, and that has to be preserved at all costs. But this is a huge turning point, not just in Irish history, but in international history. Maybe if the response from the government had have been different, maybe not so repressive, maybe things would have been different, but we don't know, because the response from the government wasn't different, and this is the response that we get. So everyone, I think I've talked for long enough. I hope I've covered sort of things that Donald would have covered as well, but thanks so much for listening to me. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here today.
Thanks so much, Liz. I think you'll see that appreciation expressed in the questions and discussion. And we've a little bit of housekeeping to do now, because we'll revert to the normal kind of table up there and